The debris field shouldn't have been moving. That was the first thing Fleet Singer Orith noticed when the asterisk ascendant chorus dropped out of fold transit and the forward observation array populated with data. Not the planet itself, blue-white, unremarkable, the kind of world the hegemony cataloged by the thousands. Not the 17 sister vessels materializing alongside, their hull lights strobing through the dark. What pulled Orith's secondary eyes toward the sensor display was a cluster of metalite fragments in low orbit, fragments that were, according to the laws of celestial mechanics, moving in precisely the wrong direction. Not drifting, not tumbling on decay vectors. Moving. Fleet Singer. Navigation Second Pural's voice carried the particular flatness that meant she had already checked her instruments twice. The debris signature matches the destroyed survey probe we sent 6 rotations ago. Orith studied the fragments. They were arranging themselves. Slowly, with no visible propulsion source, the shattered remnants of their own reconnaissance drone were forming a loose geometric pattern in the upper atmosphere of the human world. No ship was near them. No signal preceded them. "What did they do to our probe?" Orith asked. Pural had no answer. That was the first mystery. It would not be the last. 6 rotations earlier, the hegemony's initial survey team had arrived at the coordinates designated Target Acquisition Site 7, a system with 1 habitable world, pre-spaceflight civilization, moderate resource value. Standard procedure. The probe entered orbit, began passive atmospheric scanning, transmitted 17 seconds of data back to the fleet, and then went silent. Not destroyed in the way weapons destroyed things. The heat signature was wrong for a munitions strike. The electromagnetic collapse suggested something more like dissolution, as if the probe had encountered a field it had no category for and simply ceased to cohere as a unified object. The survey team marked it as equipment failure and filed the standard report. They noted in the supplementary column that in those 17 seconds of data, 1 anomaly appeared, a single radio frequency transmission from the surface aimed directly at the probe. Duration, 0.3 seconds. Content, uninterpretable. Frequency, 847 MHz, which meant nothing to anyone reviewing the file. The file was forwarded to intelligence processing. Intelligence processing was backed up by 11 weeks of similar reports from 37 other acquisition sites. No one read it before the fleet was dispatched. That was the second thing Orith didn't know yet. The third thing she didn't know, and this one would come to matter more than either of the others, was why the humans had sent the transmission at all, not what it said. Why they bothered. The probe had been running full-spectrum stealth protocol. To every instrument humanity possessed, it should have been invisible. They had pinged it anyway. In the dark, across 300 kilometers of vacuum, a civilization that wasn't supposed to know it was being watched had looked up and said, "We see you." Fleet Singer, Pural again, quieter now. "We're receiving a signal from the surface. Broad spectrum, not targeted at any specific ship." Translated. The ship's language processing array worked for 4 seconds, an eternity for a system that could parse 47 known languages in under 1. When the translation came back, it was short. It was not aggressive. It was not a declaration of resistance or a demand for identification. It said, "You have entered the debris field. Please do not move your vessels until we have completed safety verification." Orith read the message twice. "Safety verification," she repeated. "That is the translation, Fleet Singer." She looked at the sensor display. Her fleet, 17 warships of the 7th Hegemonic Armada, combined displacement equal to the mass of a small moon, was being asked to hold position for asterisk safety verification, as if they were cargo haulers waiting for a dock inspection, as if the humans on the surface were the authority here and her armada were visitors who had failed to properly check in. "Ignore it," Orith said. Begin orbital insertion sequence. 17 ships began to move. 41 seconds later, 3 of them lost navigational control simultaneously. It was not an attack. That was the bewildering thing, the detail that Orith would return to again and again in the operational logs she kept throughout what followed. A weapon leaves evidence, a vector, an energy signature, a point of origin. What happened to the mournful architecture and the asterisk second principle and the scout vessel asterisk thin patience was not a weapon doing anything to them. It was the environment simply refusing to cooperate. The asterisk mournful architecture found her gravitational stabilizers suddenly calibrating against a tidal field that the sensors insisted did not exist. She began to yaw. The helmsman corrected. She yawed harder. The tidal field was real, measurably, undeniably real. It simply had no source that matched any stellar body within the system. The asterisk second principle hit what the engineering team initially called a pressure anomaly, a region of space where the local vacuum density was measurably, impossibly higher than the regions around it, as if something had compressed the emptiness itself into a barrier 3 kilometers wide and utterly invisible. Her forward momentum dropped by 60% in under 2 seconds. No impact, no collision, just resistance from something that physics said could not resist anything. And the thin patience asterisk, smallest of the 3, simply stopped receiving signals from her own propulsion array, not from interference. The signals were transmitting correctly. The propulsion array was receiving them correctly. It simply declined to respond, as if the ship had decided at some deep mechanical level that continuing forward was inadvisable. Fleet Singer, the asterisk thin patience asterisk S commander, broadcast over the fleet channel, and Orith noted that his voice, for the first time in the 18 cycles she'd served alongside him, sounded genuinely uncertain. My ship is functional. My ship is not moving. Those are the only 2 facts I can give you. Can you identify the interference source? A pause. Fleet Singer, our sensors show that the interference source is the debris field, the fragments from our own destroyed probe. They appear to be generating something, but that's not possible. They're inert metal. Orith stared at the tactical display. The fragment pattern had shifted again. The loose geometric arrangement had tightened, the pieces drawing slightly closer together, as if something invisible were curating them. Pull back to safe distance, she ordered. All ships hold at 2,000 kilometers. The Armada retreated. On the surface of the blue-white world, in an operations center that no hegemony intelligence file had ever identified, a woman named Yale Dagan set down her coffee, looked at the confirmation readout on her screen and said, very quietly, "Good." The man beside her, her assistant, her former student, the person who had not slept in 61 hours, looked at the same readout and said, "They'll figure it out." "Eventually," Yale said, "but not before we need them to." "What if they don't wait? What if they just start shooting?" She picked her coffee back up. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "Then we lose a different way, but I don't think they will." "Why?" "Because," she said, and her voice carried the particular steadiness of someone who had already made peace with all the worst outcomes. "They're curious. Every species that makes it to the stars is curious. That's the only reason they're up there instead of down here." She was right, and she was also telling him only half of what she knew. That omission would matter enormously later. Fleet Singer Orith was, by hegemony standards, considered a measured commander. Not cautious, measured. The distinction mattered in hegemony military culture. Caution implied fear of failure, while measured implied respect for information. She had not achieved command of a 17-vessel armada by being reckless, and she had not held that command for 12 cycles by being timid. She was also, though she would have resisted the word, intrigued. The humans should not have known the debris field was relevant. They should not have been able to affect it. Inert metal fragments in orbital decay could not, under any framework of physics the hegemony employed, generate gravitational anomalies or vacuum pressure barriers. The fact that they apparently had done exactly that meant one of three things. Either the hegemony's understanding of physics had a significant gap, or the humans had introduced something into the fragments during the probe's destruction, or the humans had some technology so fundamentally unlike anything in the hegemony's experience that it was operating on principles no one had yet categorized. The third option was vanishingly unlikely. Humanity was pre-spaceflight. Pre-spaceflight civilizations did not develop exotic physics. She filed option 3 under asterisk implausible and focused on option 2. They seeded the debris, she said to her staff, gathered now in the asterisk ascendant chorus asterisk S tactical chamber. When they destroyed the probe, they introduced some form of field generator into the fragments, small enough that we missed it in the debris scan. That's how they're manipulating local space. Weapons Choir Tessinen, the oldest member of her senior staff, clicked his jaw plates together in the hegemony gesture for I agree, but I am bothered by something. Fleet Singer, the timeline doesn't support that interpretation. The probe was destroyed in 0.3 seconds. The fragment analysis shows no thermal scarring consistent with the attachment of secondary devices, and the humans would have needed to know before the probe arrived that there would be debris to seed. Then they prepared in advance for a probe they didn't know was coming. The tactical chamber was very quiet. They prepared in advance, Orth repeated slower, for a probe they didn't know was coming, for an invasion fleet that hadn't been assembled yet. She looked around the room. What exactly have we been sent to conquer? No one answered, which was itself an answer of a kind. Here is what the intelligence file had failed to convey. Because the intelligence file had been compiled from passive observation records, and those records had captured behavior without capturing asterisk pattern. For 11 years before the hegemony fleet arrived, Earth had been watching. Not watching for the hegemony specifically, watching for anyone, for anything. Because 11 years ago, a radio telescope array in the high desert of what humans called Chile had detected a signal, faint, structured, unmistakably non-natural, and a team of 14 scientists had spent 3 weeks confirming that the signal was real before spending the next 6 months arguing about whether to tell anyone. They told. The reaction was not what the 14 scientists expected. There were no press conferences, no presidential addresses, no dramatic announcements. Instead, a series of very quiet conversations happened in very secure rooms, and at the end of those conversations, a project was established with no public name, a classified budget, and a single operational mandate. Assume the signal senders know where we are. Assume they're coming. Assume we cannot match them conventionally. Figure out what we can do that they wouldn't expect. Yale Dagan was the third director of that project. She had inherited a team of 400 scientists, an infrastructure of orbital monitoring equipment, and a predecessor's notes that contained one sentence she had thought about every day since reading it. The advantage of the Defender is that they know the terrain. Terrain in this context did not mean geography. It meant physics. Specifically, and this was the part that had taken 7 years to develop, that had consumed 3 parallel research programs and cost 2 lives and 1 researcher's permanent neurological function. It meant the physics of what happened when you introduced specific resonant frequency electromagnetic pulses into a region of space with particular density characteristics, and how those pulses, under the right conditions, could interact with the quantum foam of local spacetime in ways that produced effects which looked, from the outside, like the environment itself was hostile. Not weapons. Never weapons. They didn't have weapons capable of threatening a hegemony vessel. Terrain modification. They had spent 11 years learning how to make space itself inhospitable. The debris field wasn't seeded with anything. The fragments were moving because 17 relay stations in low orbit, each one the size of a shoebox, each one painted the same spectral black as the debris surrounding them, each one running on a power cell small enough to be missed by a sensor array looking for ship-scale threats, were generating the pulses that made physics local to that region. Argumentative. Orith's misinterpretation of asterisk-seeded devices would cost her 2 hours of search time. 2 hours during which Yale Dagan's team completed the next phase of the system she'd been building since long before this fleet appeared on her screens. Everything the hegemony thought it understood about what it was facing was, in ways both small and catastrophic, wrong. And every time they corrected one misunderstanding, the correction would lead them somewhere worse. Fleet Singer. Purell's voice held a new quality now, one that Orith associated with navigators who were reporting things they genuinely did not want to be reporting. We've completed the debris scan. There are no embedded devices, no thermal signatures, no power sources, no foreign materials. The fragments are exactly what they appear to be, fragments. Then why are they moving? We don't know. Run the scan again. We've run it 6 times, Fleet Singer. Same result. Tessanin's jawplates clicked, so option 2 is eliminated. Which leaves option 3, Orith said. Which is impossible. Which was asterisk implausible asterisk, she corrected. Those are different words. She pulled up the system map. 17 ships, 2,000 kilometers out, facing a world that had been classified as pre-spaceflight and was demonstrably doing something to the fabric of local space with no technology anyone could identify. She had a mandate. She had a fleet. She had a mission that the Hegemony Acquisition Council had assessed as Category 2 low resistance, meaning the expected timeline from orbital insertion to surface pacification was 4 to 7 rotations. She did not move for a long moment. Open a channel to the surface, she said finally, directed at the origin point of their earlier transmission. You want to talk to them. I want to understand what we're dealing with. Yes, I want to talk to them. The channel opened. There was a pause of 11 seconds, she timed it, and then a human voice came through. Female, Orith's translator registered, though the hegemony had only sketchy models for human vocal gender. The voice was calm, not the calm of someone reading a prepared statement. The calm of someone who had expected this call and had decided, sometime before it came, exactly how they were going to handle it. This is Director Dagan. I assume you have questions. I have many questions, Orith said. I'm sure, so do I, but I'll let you go first. How are you affecting local space without any detectable technology? A pause, brief. The kind that meant the answer was ready and the pause was a decision, not a search. I'm not going to tell you that, Yale said. But I'll tell you this. We've been building it for 11 years. Long enough that it's not a prototype anymore. Long enough that it works consistently. Long enough that if you keep moving your ships forward, what happened to your 3 vessels will happen to all 17. You're threatening my fleet. No, I'm describing physics. There's a difference. A slight shift in her voice, not warmer exactly, but more direct. You came here to take something from us. We can't stop you the conventional way, but we had 11 years to get creative. What do you want? The pause this time was longer. Honestly, I want you to leave, but I don't think that's on the table, so I'll settle for negotiation. Orith stared at the tactical display. A pre-spaceflight civilization was offering to negotiate with an armada. The audacity of it was almost physically disorienting. Why would I negotiate? I have 17 warships. You have 14, Yale said. Check your count again. The asterisk second principle was gone. Not destroyed, her crew had evacuated. The vessel itself had simply drifted, rudderless, into the outer debris field, while the fleet's attention was concentrated on the channel conversation. And there, it had encountered what the remaining ship's sensors could only describe as a region of coherent gravitational inversion, which was a phrase that meant nothing in any theoretical framework but described precisely what the sensor data showed. and by the time anyone could organize a response. The asterisk second principle was tumbling in a decay orbit that would bring her down through the atmosphere in approximately 18 hours. 18 hours. Not enough time to mount a rescue mission without sending ships through whatever the debris field was doing. Exactly enough time to keep the fleet occupied and afraid and uncertain. She planned this, Tessanin said very quietly from across the tactical chamber. The ship loss. All of it, the timing, the conversation. She started talking to us specifically when she needed our attention elsewhere. He clicked his jaw plates, this time the gesture for asterisk something I should have seen sooner. The negotiation offer wasn't an offer, it was a distraction. Then what is she actually doing while we're distracted? That was the question. The question that would, in the next 4 hours, turn Fleet Singer Orith's understanding of this situation inside out. What Yale was doing was this. She was buying time for the network to complete its fifth and final node. The relay stations in low orbit, 17 of them, shoebox-sized, painted black, were nodes 1 through 4 of a system that required 5 to achieve what the project called asterisk full local resonance. Node 5 was not in orbit. It had never been intended for orbit. Node 5 was a ground-based installation in the Antarctic interior, a facility that had been under construction for 6 years, that was currently 3 hours from operational readiness, and whose activation would extend the terrain modification field from low orbit down to the surface and up to approximately 1,500 kilometers altitude. Inside that field, the physics of spacetime would become, as the team's lead theorist had put it, negotiable. Not dangerous, necessarily, not a weapon, but unpredictable in ways that made sustained fleet operations effectively impossible. Navigational calculations would require constant recalculation. Weapons targeting would drift. Communication between ships would suffer from delays that shouldn't exist at these distances. It would be like trying to fight a battle in a room where the floor kept changing angle. Not impossible to operate in, but exhausting, disorienting, designed for exactly the species that had built it and understood its patterns, and exactly nightmarish for anyone encountering it for the first time. 3 hours. Yale needed the fleet distracted, uncertain, and not shooting for 3 hours. She had bought 40 minutes with the first conversation. The asterisk second principle would buy more. But she was acutely, uncomfortably aware that she was gambling the survival of 8 billion people on the assumption that curiosity would hold an alien fleet in place long enough for a construction crew in Antarctica to finish bolting together the last relay array. Her assistant, Marcus, his name was Marcus, and he hadn't slept in 70 hours now, looked at the countdown on the secondary screen and then at her. 2 hours 40 minutes. I know. They're going to figure out what we're doing. Eventually. Yale, what if they decide to just start destroying cities? What if they stop trying to understand us and just start breaking things until we stop? She was quiet for a moment, genuinely quiet in a way she rarely allowed herself. Then we lose, she said, but we cost them, and the cost will make them hesitate the next time they find someone like us. That's not comforting. No, she agreed, it isn't. She looked at the feed showing the Armada holding position at 2,000 kilometers. 14 now warships, each one capable of reducing a city to glass in minutes. And between them and the surface, shoebox-sized relays, 6 years of theoretical physics translated into hardware, and a construction crew in Antarctica who were, right now, working in rotating 30-minute shifts because the cold was bad enough to damage their equipment if they paused longer. 3 hours. She opened the channel again. Director Dagan. Orith's voice was different now. The translation layer stripped out most inflection, but there was something tighter in the cadence, a compression that suggested controlled urgency. We have found your relay stations. Yale's hand, below the desk where no camera could see it, went very still. Have you? 17 of them, low orbit. They are not what you told us they were. I didn't tell you what they were. You let us believe the debris field itself was the source. I let you draw your own conclusions. That's different. A pause on the other end. When Orth spoke again, there was something in the cadence that the translator rendered as careful, deliberate. You are very precise about the difference between lying and allowing misunderstanding. It's an important difference. Why? Because one of them I can live with. Silence, 6 seconds of it. Then, we are going to destroy the relay stations, Director, all 17, and then we are going to continue with our original mission. You can try, Yale said. You cannot stop us. Fleet Singer, that's the title, yes. I've stopped you 3 times without you understanding how. I don't need you to believe me. I need you to be curious enough to hold position while you figure it out. Why would I do that? Yale looked at the countdown. 2 hours, 11 minutes. Because, she said, the moment you destroy one of those relay stations, the interference pattern changes, and I can't promise you what it changes to. She cut the channel. Marcus stared at her. Is that true? Partially. Which part is true? The part about the interference pattern changing. She pulled up a schematic on the side display. If they destroy a node before the 5th one comes online, the field geometry shifts unpredictably. We don't know what it does. It might do nothing. It might do something much worse than we intended. You're threatening them with something you don't control. I'm describing physics, she almost smiled. There's a difference. 2 hours later, the Asterisk Ascendant Chorus launched 6 precision munitions at the nearest relay station. The munitions were the Hegemony's standard orbital ordnance, designed for destroying hardened surface targets, more than sufficient for a shoebox-sized relay. 4 of the 6 munitions experienced guidance failure at approximately 300 meters from the target, not from jamming. The guidance systems reported nominal function. They simply computed that the shortest path to the target required passing through a region of space that their collision avoidance logic had marked as occupied by a solid object, despite sensors showing empty vacuum. The remaining 2 munitions reached the target. The relay station did not explode. It experienced what the subsequent engineering analysis would describe as asterisk catastrophic induced resonance. The munitions' detonation energy fed back into the station's field generation circuit, which was not designed to absorb that input, and discharged it laterally across the local spacetime geometry, which had the effect of 3 ships lost inertial navigation simultaneously. A 4th found its fold drive attempting to activate without any crew command. The fold drive safeties engaged, but not before the ship translated 40 kilometers in a random direction and found herself inside the debris field. She made it back out, but for 11 minutes, the Asterisk Hegemony third voice was inside whatever the debris field was doing, and when her crew filed their reports, the senior engineer's testimony contained one line that Orth read 4 times before forwarding it to intelligence processing with a priority flag. During the 11 minutes of exposure, our instruments recorded the local passage of time as consistent. Ship chronometers recorded the 11 minutes correctly. However, comparing our internal recording timestamps to the fleet's synchronized clock afterward, we appear to have lost 4 minutes that no instrument aboard registered passing. Somewhere on the surface, a theorist who hadn't slept in 3 days read that report and said, to no one in particular, "Oh, it's already doing that." Then she called Yale. "Director, the field's affecting temporal coherence at the macro scale. That wasn't supposed to happen until full activation." "What does that mean?" "It means the nodes are interacting with each other in ways we didn't model. The 5th node coming online might not be additive. It might be exponential." Yale was quiet for a moment that felt, to everyone in the room, substantially longer than it measured. Exponential how? I don't know, that's why I'm calling. The fifth node came online 14 minutes ahead of schedule because the Antarctic team, aware of the fleet's escalating response, had skipped 3 calibration steps that the project protocols listed as mandatory. The team leader, a man named Kowalski who had been awake for 82 hours, had looked at the calibration checklist, then at the countdown, then at the feed showing the Armada above and said, "We skip to live. If it breaks while we're trying." They voted. It was unanimous. Procedures designed for peacetime could not survive contact with an actual invasion. The fifth node activated. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then every ship in the Hegemony Armada received a simultaneous alert from their navigational arrays. Not an alarm, not a warning, but a status update, the kind that systems generate when they are recalibrating to a changed environmental baseline. The kind that meant the environment had changed enough that all prior calculations were no longer valid. And the fold drive on the asterisk ascendant chorus, the engine designed to bend space for transit between star systems, activated itself. Not partially, not through a crew error. The fold drive looked at the new resonance geometry of local space, found a configuration it recognized as favorable, and attempted to initiate transit. Orith had 2 seconds between the alert and the moment she needed to make a decision. "Emergency shutdown," she ordered. "All fold drives full lockout." "Fleet Singer, a full lockout will take 12 minutes to." "Do it asterisk now." The asterisk ascendant chorus shuddered. Every console in the tactical chamber flickered. The fold drive, interrupted mid-cycle, discharged its stored energy through the hull plating in a bass vibration that Orith felt in her jawplates, her spine, the membranes of her secondary eyes. Then it stopped. The displays came back, 14 ships showing, all stable, the fold drive reading dormant. But the navigation display was wrong. The positions were wrong. Not by much, a few kilometers here, a few there. Small enough to be measurement error, except that this system did not produce measurement errors, and the discrepancy was in a consistent direction, as if everything had moved slightly in the same way at the same time. "Where are we?" Tessinen asked. "Same orbital position," Purell said slowly. "Same position, but—" She stopped. "But what?" "The stellar position has shifted by 0.003 degrees, which means—" "We're earlier," Orith said. The word landed in the silence. Not asterisk elsewhere, earlier. The fold drive, fed by the resonance field the humans had constructed around their world, had not translated them in space. It had translated them in time. 19 minutes, the stellar cartography would later calculate. 19 minutes into the past, placing them at the exact moment to the minute when they had first dropped out of fold transit and Orith had first seen the debris field moving. They had moved backward through 11 years of human engineering and arrived at the beginning of their own arrival. The channel to the surface opened, unprompted, and Director Yale Dagan's voice came through. She sounded, for the first time, like someone who had not entirely predicted what happened. "Fleet Singer, that was not supposed to do that." "What did you do to us?" "We built terrain," Yale said. "We built it very carefully for 11 years with everything we had for exactly this situation. And apparently," a pause, the sound of someone breathing, "apparently we built it better than we knew." "You don't know what you built." "We know what we intended, what it's become," another pause, "that's new." Orith looked at the tactical display. 14 ships, a debris field that had not yet been disturbed by their weapons, a planet below that had, by all measurable physics, just done something that no hegemony theorist had ever theorized was possible, and a human woman on the surface who had spent 11 years building a machine she did not fully understand, aimed it at an invasion fleet she couldn't fight conventionally, and activated it anyway. "Why?" Orith asked. Because we had no other option. You could have surrendered. To what end? Orth found she didn't have a clean answer for that. The hegemony's acquisition protocols were not designed around outcomes that were good for the acquired. She knew that. Everyone in the Armada knew that. You built all of this, Orth said carefully, knowing you might not survive the attempt. Yes. Knowing it might do nothing. Knowing it might do something you couldn't control. Yes. Knowing that the last thing it might do is kill you along with us. A pause. When Yale answered, her voice had the quality of something that had been weighed, tested, and accepted. We had 8 billion people on the ground and 14 warships in orbit. The calculation wasn't complicated. Tessanin spoke quietly, not into the channel. To Orth, just to Orth. Fleet Singer, I don't know what to do with them. Neither do I. They're dangerous. Yes. But not, he stopped, started again. They're not dangerous the way species are dangerous when they have power. They're dangerous because they will do anything when they don't. Orth opened the channel again. Director Dagan, if I order my fleet to retreat, to fold out of this system completely, what happens to the field you've generated? It stays, the nodes remain active. Indefinitely. Until we decide otherwise. And if we return, with a larger fleet. The pause was not hesitation. It was, Orth recognized now, the pause of someone deciding how much truth to give. Then we'll know what it does to a larger fleet, Yale said. The channel was quiet. 14 ships. A debris field rebuilt into something no one aboard those ships could model. A planet wrapped in physics that had just sent them 19 minutes into their own past, without any mechanism the hegemony had categories for. And at the center of all of it, not a fleet, not a weapon, not a military force. A director. A project. 400 scientists. 11 years of creativity deployed specifically because they had no conventional option and had decided that the absence of conventional options was not the same as the absence of options. Orth made her decision. All ships, she broadcast to the fleet. We are folding out. Full retreat to the assembly point. Navigation, calculate for minimum safe fold distance. Engineering, complete lockout protocols before any drive activation. She did not say they beat us. She did not say we failed. She filed no report that used either word. What she filed, in the operational log of the 7th Hegemonic Armada, under mission outcome, was a category that had not previously been used in any hegemony record she could locate. Encounter suspended. Target environment non-compliant with operational parameters. It was the most honest thing she could put into language, without having language for what she had experienced. Before the fleet folded out, she opened the channel one final time. Director Dagan. Fleet Singer. You knew, when you started building your system 11 years ago, that it might not work. Yes. You built it anyway. Yes. Why? And Yale Dagan, who had not slept in 91 hours, who had coffee residue on her collar and a stress fracture in the third metacarpal of her left hand, from gripping a desk railing during the fold drive event, who had watched a number on a screen tell her that everything she had staked her species' survival on had functioned in ways she didn't entirely understand, said something that would be translated, retranslated, and argued over in hegemony academic institutions for the next 40 years. Because not building it was the only option that definitely didn't work. The Armada folded out. The debris field settled. The relay stations hummed on their orbital paths, shoebox-sized, painted black, monitoring empty space. In the Antarctic, Kowalski's team sat in the cold and ate food that had been reheated too many times and didn't taste like anything. And someone put music on because the silence after the tension was its own kind of pressure. Marcus brought Yale more coffee. This cup was hot. It worked, he said. Something worked, she said. What it actually did, she shook her head. We need to study that temporal displacement. That was not in any model. Does it matter they left? It matters because they'll come back, bigger, better prepared. She looked at the orbital feed, empty space where an armada had been. And when they do, we need to understand what we built, not just that it works, why it works. And if we can't understand it before they return. She wrapped both hands around the hot cup. Outside the Antarctic station, the wind was doing something that made the walls creak. Somewhere above that wind, 17 shoebox-sized stations were moving through darkness, doing things to physics that no one had fully theorized yet. Then we figure out something else, she said. That's what we do. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. You're not scared, he said. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a criticism. It was an observation, the way you observe something that doesn't fit the pattern you expected. Of course I'm scared, Yale said. I've been scared for 11 years. Fear isn't the thing you eliminate, it's the thing you work around. She set the cup down and pulled up the next briefing document. The relays needed maintenance schedules. The temporal displacement data needed analysis. The project's next phase, the one she hadn't told the hegemony fleet existed, needed a team leader. The world outside was still there. 8 billion people who had no idea how close the morning had come to being entirely different. 8 billion people going to work, raising children, arguing about things that mattered to them deeply, and that mattered not at all in the context of the last 91 hours. She would not tell them what had happened. The project's mandate was clear on that point. But they would keep building, quietly, carefully, with everything they had. Because the Armada would come back. And when it did, humanity would not be waiting at the same coordinates it had been. It would be waiting somewhere further along. In the hegemony's intelligence processing archive, the report on target acquisition Site 7 was eventually reclassified. Its new designation was a category that did not previously exist, a category Orith had requisitioned specifically, because she could not find language within the existing framework to describe accurately what had occurred. The category was called, in the hegemony's administrative language, something that translated roughly as civilizations exhibiting threat characteristics independent of technological advancement. The accompanying notes, which Orith wrote herself, contained one paragraph that was later circulated to every fleet commander in the hegemony as required reading before any new acquisition mission. The humans of Target Acquisition Site 7 did not defeat the 7th Armada through superior firepower, advanced technology, or military sophistication. They defeated it through 11 years of preparation for a threat they could not verify was coming, using physical principles they did not fully understand, deployed by scientists who had not slept properly in weeks, built on the foundational assumption that losing was acceptable provided the cost of losing was high enough to matter. I do not know how to classify this as a military threat. I know only that they watched us leave, and by the time our last ship folded out, they were already preparing for the next time. Not as survivors, as engineers. The distinction is important, and I lack the framework to fully articulate why. She sent the report. Then she filed a second document, shorter, marked personal, not for distribution. We arrived in their sky, expecting a world that did not yet. No war could come from the stars. They knew. They had always known. They built their answer in the dark, quietly, without being certain anyone was coming, because that is apparently what this species does when it is afraid and has no other options, and the silence in the sky refuses to tell them whether the threat is real. I think we should not go back. I think if we go back, we will find that 19 minutes was not a malfunction. I think it was a warning.